Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time. Let no man write my epitaph until Ireland takes her place among the nations of the earth. That is a quote by Robert Emmet, and after this episode, I think you will agree that time has come. If you want to understand what a place name can do, how a single word can carry power, memory, violence and hope, start with Athlone. Now hold that thought of the Irish town on the River Shannon, landing like a flipped coin in very different hands. That single word will tell you a story that moves from a medieval ford on the Shannon to drawing rooms of the Empire, and then in a reversal that drills through any tidy narrative, to the wind-blown sand of a Cape Flats township where children learn to sing in defiance in South Africa. Athlone in Ireland sits where the River Shannon squeezes itself through the Midlands, where east meets west, and the island can be said to be clasped. The town straddles two counties, Westmeath on the east bank, Roscommon on the west, and its name in Irish, Baile Luan, points at this crossing, the town of Luan's Ford. Local people will tell you that the landscape names everything. For centuries, the name simply held place and passage. People crossed there to trade, to fight, and to flee. The castle that still looms on the west bank dates back to the 13th century. It is the squat thing of grey stone and slit windows, a constant reminder that this was not just an agreeable market town, but a choke point of military consequence. If you want a date to hang in your head for context, think of the Williamite Wars. Athlone was besieged, the Shannon narrowed the battlefield and made the town a prize. Jacobite defenders and Williamite attackers fought bitterly for the crossing. The stories the locals repeat about cannon smoke, desperate sallies, and bodies in the shallows are not romantic legend, but the kind of hard memory that makes river crossing into a place of significance. Athlone's geography made it strategic. Its name, spoken in passing for centuries, gathered that strategy into meaning. Fast forward through centuries of market days, regiments billeted, and the quiet commerce of a town that held together by river. To 1917, a year when names were under pressure across Europe. In Britain, anti-German sentiment had reached the royal family itself. The House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, with its German-sounding lineage, began to look dangerously foreign in the public eyes. The monarchs, the courtiers, and the extended kin all scrubbed their titles clean of the Teutonic consonants. Into that movement walked Prince Alexander of Teck. He was born in 1874 at Kensington Palace into exactly the sort of web of kinship British aristocracy is built from. Princess Mary Adelaide was his mother. His sister married the future King George V. He had the usual education, Eton and Sandhurst, and the usual cavalry commissions. He spent his early career in imperial campaigns, the Matabele conflicts in southern Africa in the 1890s, and then the Boer War. He was very much the imperial soldier, the sort who learned how to ride and to take orders and to make a name for himself on dusty campaign maps. He married Princess Alice of Albany in 1904, knotting himself tighter to the monarchy, but 1917 demanded a reinvention. He renounced his German titles and adopted the surname Cambridge, and, crucially for the story, was created the Earl of Athlone and Viscount Tremeton. Why Athlone? Because British names that sounded best were often those that pointed to a solid past. Garrison towns, such as Athlone, fortresses, or places whose names carried a military ring. Athlone, with its long history as a Shannon crossing and its memory of sieges, fit the bill perfectly. It sounded empire-like in its decisiveness while being, crucially, safely distant from the politically inconvenient realities of Britain's own continental entanglements, also known as World War I. The title was ceremonial and neatly packaged. The name was chosen as if it were a button on the coat of a state. The Earl's public career followed its own tidy arc. He served on the Western Front in the First World War, climbed to the rank of Brigadier General, and then stepped into the viceregal service at the age of interwar imperial administration. In 1924, he was appointed governor in the next important place in our story, the General Union of South Africa. He lived in Pretoria and Cape Town and represented the Crown through a period of uneasy consolidation. Later, as war again gripped the globe, he was appointed Governor-General of Canada from 1940 to 1946. During these years of a world history crisis, the title Athlone would be attached in diplomatic dispatches and newsreel captions to conferences and ceremonies, to toasts and handshakes. In 1943 and 1944, the Allied leaders met in Quebec for two crucial conferences. The viceregal household in Ottawa, the Earl among them, played a ceremonial part in that wartime choreography. In those photographs he is there, the reliable, respectable figure you'd expect, grey-haired and formally posed. His title, Athlone, moves through the empire as a little brand of order. And then a small thing happens, which is also a huge thing. Names travel, and the people who apply them are not always the people who live under them. In the 30s, a stretch of the Cape Flats, that flat sandy plain outside Cape Town where the wind scours the dunes, was officially renamed Athlone. It was the kind of colonial naming gesture you could imagine honour a viceregal visitor by pinning his title on a few square miles of scrubland. On a map, this Athlone sits on a table. On the ground, it is a marginal landscape, a place that white urban planners and administrators found convenient for the things they wanted to do when they started to separate people by race. The history that follows needs no cinematic flourish to be brutal. The Group Areas Act of 1950 is the mechanised legal version of a bad plan. It shaped South Africa's cities by turning them into instruments of racial segregation. White centre, black periphery, tidy slices of privilege carved out of geography. Whole communities were uprooted from areas designated as white and dumped onto the Cape Flats. Stripped land, little infrastructure, and houses made of corrugated iron and hope. Athlone, the name bestowed in a moment of viceregal flattery, became part of a landscape of enforced exile. Locals would come to refer, with bitter irony, to that part of the flats as the dumping ground. This was the cruelty of bureaucratic naming. A title that once denoted dignity now sat in a place of dispossession. If you want evidence of how that transformation matters, look at the everyday things. The Earl of Athlone had a life of receptions and carpets and careful speech. The Athlone township had schools that overflowed, clinics with lines, houses that leaked when the winter wind came. But names are not final sentences. They are handles people pick up and turn to their purposes. In Athlone, Cape Town, culture grew despite the conditions. Football teams gathered in the dust to play and to learn loyalty. Churches and mosques became centres of mutual aid. Music, that extraordinary weather of townships, found forms there. Artists who emerged from Cape Town's dispossessed districts and from its inner city neighbourhoods and its townships would go on to reshape South African sound. Abdullah Ibrahim, known in his early career as Dollar Brand, absorbed the light and rhythm of Cape Town, the mingled crank and prayer of jazz and township song, and he made art out of it. Brenda Fassie, though from the township of Langa, sang a kind of township pop that crossed the flats and the suburbs and electrified young people from one end of the city to the other. Athlone's stadiums hosted matches and also became places where the politics of identity were rehearsed in the public. Chants, banners, and the simple power of bodies gathered. Politics in Athlone sharpened into fury during the 1970s and 80s. South Africa's security apparatus tightened like a fist. Protest became a daily atmosphere. In October 1985, there was an event that made the name Athlone ring on the international radio. On that day, local youths were staging protests. Police tactics included infiltration and ambush. Men in crates hid on the back of a truck and then sprang into action. In the case of an afternoon protest, people were shot. Funerals and outrage followed. The precise specifics of any single incident matter. The lives lost, the families who were left. But what matters for the place name argument is the moral inversion. The man whose title hosted conferences to defeat fascism in one hemisphere now lent his name to a township where people died fighting apartheid's smallness. It was a dissonance a historian can't ignore. Yet, to end on a horror would be to flatten the complex human picture. The same name on a map can be woven into songs and slogans of community life. Athlone Stadium has hosted clubs like Santos and Ajax Cape Town. Its terraces were places where grit met passion. Athlone Institute and local civic organisations became engines of education and solidarity. When Nelson Mandela walked free and the world shifted, these locales did not vanish. They remade themselves. Today Athlone is many things. A suburb with a difficult past, a site of memory, and a place where children can still kick a ball and elders still remember the old market days. A name that began in Irish Fordland had, across a century, been adopted into a vocabulary of imperial pomp, colonial mapping, legislated exile, and community endurance. And we must not lose the Irish Athlone in that telling. Go back to the Shannon. Stand on the bridge, and you can hear how this Irish town's history is older, gentler, and crueler in its own ways. Athlone's Gaelic origin, Ohalún, anchors it to a local story of passage and place. That original Athlone is the source. The Earl's title stole the sound and carried it away. Elsewhere, the same sound was pinned onto other landscapes and altered in the minds and mouths of their inhabitants. In Ireland, the town's castle has been preserved and its military past remembered. In South Africa, the name took on new meanings that belong to its people now, not to the man who borrowed the word. So what's the point of all this? Why trace a single name from a lakeside crossing to a royal title to the dust of a township? Because names are not just decorative. They are instruments of power, but they are also reclaimable. The Earl of Athlone chose his title out of a desire for respectable resonance. Colonial officials affixed Athlone to a patch of sand to honour him, but the people who lived under that name in Cape Town turned it into a place of music, marches, funerals, and football. The name did not determine destiny. People did. That flipping, the movement from imposition to redefinition, is the moral core of the story. Before we move on, imagine the photographic contrast again. The Earl in a drawing room wearing a sash, shaking hands with leaders whose faces now fill history books. Then the township street, where a child runs past a corrugated tin wall with a boot too big for 1 foot, singing something that sounds at once defiant and joyful. One name, two worlds, one multiplied meaning. And from that dramatic inversion of Athlone, the town in Ireland, from fortress to title to frontline, our trail leads us next to a very different kind of Irish name transported abroad. We cross the Atlantic to a hill in an American city where Irish emigrants carved out a place and, in resisting the local order, literally changed a traffic light. Tipperary Hill in Syracuse, New York. Let's start with a traffic light. A simple one on the corner of Tompkins Street and Milton Avenue, Syracuse, New York. Red on top, green on bottom is the standard order, except not here. On Tipperary Hill, the colours are reversed. Green sits proudly above red. It's the only light of its kind in the United States, and possibly the entire world. To outsiders, it looks like a mistake. To the people of Tipperary Hill, it looks like justice. Because in the 1920s, when that first light was installed, the sons of local canal diggers and labourers, all of whom were Irish immigrants, took one look at the British red over the Irish green and hurled stones until glass shattered. Again and again, the city replaced it. Again and again, the boys smashed it. They called the shards Irish confetti, and by 1928, Syracuse gave in. Alderman Huckle Ryan brokered the deal, and the traffic light was permanently inverted. To this day, the green shines above the red. It's a funny story, the kind of tale that shows up in newspapers as a novelty, but in reality, it's much more than that. It's about pride, identity, and survival. It's about a community that had been battered, mocked, and marginalised, finding a way to say, "We are here, and we will not bow our heads." And to understand why it mattered so much, we need to understand Tipperary Hill itself. Syracuse, in the early 1800s, was a frontier town, a stop on the Erie Canal. The canal was dug by hand, miles of mud and sweat linking the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. It transformed New York into a hub of trade and migration. But who was it that dug it? Largely Irish labourers, fresh off ships, poor, Catholic, and unwelcome in so-called polite society of the time. Many came from my own home county of Tipperary. When the canal was done, they stayed, climbing a hill on the city's west side and building homes there. The hill became theirs, and they renamed it Tipperary Hill. At first, it was no easy life. Irish immigrants in America were branded with every insult: lazy, drunk, papist, and criminal. No Irish need apply signs hung on shop windows. Yet on Tipperary Hill, the community dug in. They built St. Patrick's Church in 1870, a Gothic stone structure that still crowns the neighbourhood. They opened pubs, groceries and boarding houses, and they formed hurling clubs and marching bands. They carried with them not just poverty, but culture. By the turn of the 20th century, Tipperary Hill was alive with Irish voices. Children learned catechism from priests. Families told stories of famine, of eviction, and of crossing the Atlantic. They remembered Cormac's column in Cashel, Daniel O'Connell's rallies, and the songs of home. And above all, they remembered the green flag, the colour of Ireland. So when the city installed a traffic light that dared to put a red over a green, it was not about road safety. It was about symbolism. It was about who got to be on top. The first protests weren't particularly organised. They were gangs of youths, boys with slingshots and pocketfuls of stone. They waited until dusk and then aimed their hatred at the hated red lens. Smash! Then replaced. Smash again. Newspapers mocked them as hooligans. Officials complained about the cost, but the boys kept going. They weren't vandals in their own eyes, they were patriots. Each stone carried generations of defiance, from the penal laws to the Easter Rising. Each broken red lens was a tiny declaration of independence, thousands of miles from Dublin, but burning with the same pride. The persistence wore the city down. In 1928, just in time for St. Patrick's Day, that man I mentioned, Alderman John Huckle Ryan, proposed the compromise. Just flip the colours. Let green shine out on top. The authorities, tired, agreed. The boys cheered, and the crowd gathered to see the inverted light switched on. Music played, pipes were sounded, and flags were waved. It was a small victory, but in a country where Irish immigrants had so often been told to sit down and shut up, it felt monumental. Now, a century later, that single light still stands. Drivers who pass it may not know the story, but the locals do. In 1997, the city unveiled the Tipperary Hill Heritage Memorial nearby. It's a bronze statue of an Irish immigrant family. The father points up at the upside-down light. The mother stands beside him. The boy hides a slingshot behind his back, a nod to the stone throwers, which for those who don't know is actually a nickname for Tipperary people in Tipperary. It's a monument to pride passed from one generation to the next. But let's go right back to give you a deeper and wider lens on the build-up to this within the Syracuse community. Syracuse in the 1820s was a cauldron. The Erie Canal drew thousands of workers, and with them came conflict. Irish labourers clashed with local Protestants. Wages were low and conditions brutal. Many Irish settled together, huddled for safety. Tipperary Hill became a fortress of community. By the late 19th century, it was known for its pubs. Coleman's, which opened in 1933, still thrives today, and for its fierce neighbourhood loyalty. Outsiders mocked it as rough, working class and insular. Insiders cherished it as home. And it wasn't just Syracuse. Across America, Irish immigrants faced hostility. In New York City, gangs like the Dead Rabbits defended Irish turf. In Boston, Irish Catholics fought against so-called Brahmin elites. In Philadelphia, nativist riots burned Catholic churches. However, the Irish were forced to carve out their identity in the face of suspicion. Everywhere, the Irish were forced to carve out their identity in the face of suspicion. Tipperary Hill's inverted traffic light is a local quirk, but it speaks to a national story. Irish America refusing to be humiliated and insisting on visibility. The story also reveals something deeper about names and symbols. Red over green was not neutral. It carried echoes of the Union Jack, of the suppression of Irish nationalism. Flipping the order was an act of symbolic revenge, and once it was done, it endured. The upside-down light became a tourist attraction. People came, and still come, from all over to take photos beneath it. Bus tours even pause there, and locals tell the story with pride. What began as a small, smashed glass became heritage. Yet it is important to remember that Tipperary Hill is not just a novelty stop. It is the living neighbourhood. Every March, Green Beer Sunday marks the start of St. Patrick's season. The Shamrock Run, a 4-mile race, winds through its streets. The Shamrock Bunker, a local bar, becomes a hub for music and camaraderie. Families trace their ancestry back to County Tipperary. Others have joined in, Polish, Italians, African Americans, but the Irish character remains very strong. One striking thing about Tipperary Hill is how that memory travels. The boys who smashed the red lights in the 1920s probably never saw Ireland. Their parents maybe had. Their grandparents certainly had. But the outrage they felt at seeing red over green shows how deeply cultural memory embeds. You don't need to be born in a place to feel its history. That's the power of diaspora, and that's why a traffic light could stir such passion. Let's add faces to the story. One of the original stone throwers was Tom Maloney, remembered decades later as a wiry teenager with quick hands. He claimed it was his slingshot that hit the first lamp. Another was Jimmy O'Hara, who worked later in the Solvay Process Company's soda ash plant. They lived ordinary lives, factory work, families, Sunday masses, yet their mischief made history. And what about that man, Huckle Ryan? He was the son of Irish immigrants himself, known for his booming laugh and knack for politics. He understood that what seemed trivial to city engineers was life and death to his constituents' pride. By flipping that light, he cemented loyalty. He's remembered in Syracuse not just as a backroom operator, but as a man who made the city listen. Remember that Ireland itself at this time was fresh from revolution. The War of Independence ended in 1921. The Civil War soon followed. Irish newspapers carried tales of executions, ambushes and treaties. Immigrant families in Syracuse read those headlines with intensity. The boys in Tipperary Hill knew what the green flag stood for, even if they never set foot in Dublin. Their stone throwing was not random vandalism. It was solidarity across oceans. And that is why Tipperary Hill mattered and matters far beyond Syracuse. It shows how immigrant communities claim space, not just physically, but symbolically. A traffic light may be small, but it stood for the hierarchy of colours and, by extension, the hierarchy of cultures. By flipping it, the Irish claimed dignity. There's also humour in it. Irish confetti for a shattered glass. That phrase captures both defiance and mischief. The slingshot statue in the memorial makes children giggle, but it also teaches them that their heritage is tied to standing up, even cheekily, against authority. The 20th century rolled on. Tipperary Hill weathered economic shifts, the decline of heavy industry, and the rise of suburban flight, but it held its core identity. Even today, many families never leave. Generations live in the same houses. Neighbours know one another, and always the light remains, green above red, a beacon of stubbornness. Think about it this way. Athlone in South Africa showed what happens when a name is imposed from above. Tipperary Hill shows what happens when a community shapes its own symbol from below. The first story was about endurance under oppression. This one is about defiance turned into pride. Both show that names and symbols are never neutral. They are fought over, cherished and contested. And so, as we leave Syracuse, we carry with us a lesson in small victories. The fight for a traffic light may seem minor, but it spoke to something huge. The refusal of a people to accept humiliation. In Tipperary Hill, heritage is not locked in museums. It hangs above the crossroads, glowing green over red. Night after night, a reminder of who built the neighbourhood and why they never give up. I had initially thought I would make this a single episode covering 4 locations. However, this is quite long, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave it there and then cover the last 2 locations in part 2.